The crimson dust of New Providence settled on Juan Hayes's shoulders as he trudged through the remnants of what had once been Main Street. 6 hours ago, this had been a thriving colonial outpost, filled with the hopeful chatter of Earth's newest settlement. Now it was little more than smoking rubble. The Cathar attack had come without warning, swift, brutal, and seemingly without purpose. Juan adjusted the medical pack strapped to his side. The muscle memory of a battlefield medic still with him, 3 years after his discharge. His fingers instinctively checked the seal on his breather mask as the wind picked up, carrying with it the acrid scent of burnt synthetics and, something worse, the unmistakable smell of charred flesh. "Hayes, any survivors over there?" The voice of Sergeant Torres crackled through his comm unit. "Negative," Juan replied, his voice hollow. "Just more debris." This was supposed to be his fresh start. After the horrors of the Fifth Galactic Conflict, New Providence had represented everything the war wasn't: peace, growth, renewal. The agrarian colony had been established far from the traditional battle lines, its fertile soil promising a future untainted by humanity's bloody past. A low moan stopped him in his tracks. Juan froze, hand instinctively moving to the pulse rifle slung across his back. He hadn't expected to find anyone alive in this section. The Cathar bombardment had been particularly intense here. "Torres, I might have something. Stand by." He moved cautiously toward a half-collapsed storefront, stepping over shattered glass and twisted metal. The sound came again, fainter this time, but unmistakably the groan of something in pain. Juan rounded a fallen support beam and stopped dead. There, pinned beneath a collapsed wall section, lay a Cathar. But not just any Cathar. Even through the dust and blood, Juan recognized the distinctive markings on the armor. This was high-ranking royalty, possibly even... His breath caught as he saw the imperial insignia partially visible beneath the rubble. Queen Vaylina herself, the architect of the attack on New Providence, the butcher who had authorized the slaughter of countless humans during the war. His hand tightened around his rifle. One shot would end it all. One shot would avenge the thousands of human lives lost to her commands. One shot, and humanity's greatest enemy would be nothing but a corpse on a failed battlefield. The Cathar Queen's eyes fluttered open. 6 iridescent orbs arranged in a hexagonal pattern across what humans had come to call their faceplate. Those eyes focused on him with startling clarity, narrowing slightly as they registered his human form. In that moment, Juan made a decision that would alter the course of 2 species. He unshouldered his rifle and set it aside. "I'm a medic," he said, though he doubted she understood English. He raised his hands, showing the Red Cross emblem on his sleeve, a symbol recognized across most of the settled galaxy. The Cathar Queen made a sound, a series of clicks and whistles that his translator couldn't decipher. Probably a dialect reserved for royalty. Juan approached cautiously, aware that even wounded, a Cathar could tear a human apart with their secondary limbs. But the Queen remained still, watching him with those unnerving eyes. He assessed the situation quickly. The wall had collapsed across her lower body, crushing at least 2 of her limbs. Teal-colored blood pooled beneath her, not immediately fatal for a Cathar. But she would bleed out without intervention. "I'm going to help you," Juan said, more to himself than to her. "And then, you're going to tell your people to stop this madness." With practiced efficiency, he began to clear away the smaller debris, careful not to shift the main beam that pinned her. It was slow work, complicated by the fact that Cathar physiology was still largely a mystery to human medicine. What he did know came from battlefield triage, enough to keep one alive, not enough to fully heal. As he worked, his comm unit crackled to life again. "Hayes, report. What's your status?" One hesitated. If he told Torres who he had found, reinforcements would swarm this location in minutes, and they wouldn't be coming to save the Cathar Queen. "False alarm," he replied. "Just some shifting rubble. I'm continuing my sweep." He switched off his comm unit entirely, a violation of protocol that could get him court-martialed. But right now, protocol seemed less important than the moral choice before him. The Queen watched him work. Her breathing labored but steady. There was intelligence in those eyes, calculation, certainly, but also a hint of something Juan hadn't expected: curiosity. Finally, he had cleared enough debris to assess her injuries properly. 2 of her 6 limbs were crushed beyond saving, but the main thoracic cavity seemed intact. If he could stop the bleeding and stabilize her, she might survive. "This is going to hurt," he warned, knowing she couldn't understand him, but hoping his tone conveyed his intent. He administered a universal painkiller from his medkit, one of the few pharmaceuticals proven effective across most known sentient species. Then, he began the grim work of field amputation, sealing blood vessels with a cauterizing tool as he went. The Queen made no sound throughout the procedure, though her breathing quickened and her eyes dimmed periodically, the Kethar equivalent of passing out from pain. When he finished, Juan sat back on his heels, his hands covered in teal blood. The immediate danger had passed, but she was far from safe. She needed proper medical attention, somewhere away from the human settlement, where every hand would be turned against her. A distant explosion rattled the ground beneath them. The fighting was moving closer. Juan made another decision. He would get her out, away from the battle zone, somewhere they could establish communication. Perhaps, just perhaps, this could be an opportunity to end the conflict once and for all. He fashioned a crude stretcher from the debris around them. A door panel and some synthetic cable would have to do. With gentle but firm movements, he transferred the Queen onto it. "I hope you're worth this," he muttered, securing her with more cable. "Because I'm pretty sure this counts as treason." He hoisted the stretcher, grunting under the weight. Kethar were denser than humans, their exoskeletons adding significant mass. The Queen was smaller than the warriors he'd encountered on the battlefield, but she was still heavy, at least 200 pounds. Juan took a deep breath and began walking, away from the settlement, toward the foothills that marked the beginning of New Providence's unexplored wilderness. He had approximately 40 miles to cover before reaching the neutral research outpost at Kinswell Ridge, the only place he could think of where a human and a Kethar might both receive fair treatment. 40 miles, carrying an enemy queen who had ordered the destruction of his new home. 40 miles that would change everything. The first 5 miles were the hardest. Juan kept to the shadows of ruined buildings as long as he could, avoiding the attention of both human defense forces and Kethar raiding parties. Each time he heard approaching footsteps or the distinctive whine of Kethar hover units, he would duck into whatever cover was available, holding his breath until the danger passed. The Queen drifted in and out of consciousness. When awake, she watched him with those unsettling eyes, making no attempt to communicate but studying his every move. Juan wondered what she was thinking. Was she merely biding her time, waiting for rescue, or was there something more happening behind those alien eyes? As they reached the outskirts of the settlement, the terrain became more challenging. New Providence had been terraformed only partially, with most human activity concentrated in the Central Valley. The surrounding landscape remained largely as they had found it, a rust-colored wilderness of jagged rock formations and sparse, alien vegetation. Juan's shoulders burned with the effort of carrying the stretcher. He had been in peak physical condition during the war, but 3 years of civilian life had softened him. Still, the muscle memory remained, and he fell into the steady rhythm of forced marching that had been drilled into him during his service. "We need to find shelter before nightfall," he said aloud, more to break the silence than to communicate with his charge. "The temperature drops below freezing out here, and neither of us is equipped for that." As if in response, the Queen made a series of clicking sounds. Juan's translator, designed for standard Kethar military dialect, picked up fragments. "Folly," human. Death comes. One nearly dropped the stretcher in surprise. You speak English? More clicks. Then, enough! Understand enemy. Juan set the stretcher down carefully, kneeling beside it to look directly at the Queen. My name is Juan Hayes. I was a combat medic during the war. Now I'm a colonist. Or I was, until your forces attacked us. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly. Why help enemy Queen? It was a good question. One Juan had been asking himself since he made the decision not to pull the trigger. He considered giving her some noble speech about the sanctity of all life. But in the end, he opted for honesty. I took an oath as a medic, to preserve life when I can, regardless of who it belongs to. He paused. And maybe I'm tired of watching people die. The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then, Velina. What? Name. Velina. She made a gesture with one of her undamaged limbs, touching her chest plate. Queen Velina, Juan acknowledged. She made a sound that the translator didn't catch, possibly a correction or clarification. But before Juan could ask, a low rumble interrupted them. He looked up to see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, moving fast. Dust storm, he said grimly. We need to find cover, now. He scanned their surroundings. About half a mile ahead, a series of rock formations jutted from the landscape. Not ideal, but better than being caught in the open when the storm hit. Juan hoisted the stretcher again, ignoring the protest from his muscles. Hold on. This is going to be rough. He set off at a jog, the motion jostling the stretcher. Queen Velina made no sound of complaint, though Juan knew the movement must be agonizing for her injuries. The wind picked up as they approached the rocks, carrying the first particles of dust. Juan's breather mask filtered the worst of it, but his eyes stung. He wondered how Velina was faring. Cathar respiratory systems were still largely a mystery to human science. They reached the rock formation, just as the storm hit in earnest. Juan maneuvered between two tall spires, finding a small, natural alcove that offered some protection. He set the stretcher down and quickly unpacked a small shelter sheet from his emergency kit, securing it across the opening of the alcove to create a makeshift barrier against the howling dust. Inside their crude shelter, the roar of the storm was muffled, but still omnipresent. Juan checked Velina's wounds, relieved to find that the cauterization was holding. He administered another dose of painkillers, then sat back against the rock wall, allowing himself a moment of rest. Storm will pass? Velina asked, her translator rendering the question in stilted English. Eventually, Juan replied. They usually last a few hours on this part of the planet. Nothing to do but wait it out. Velina made a gesture that Juan couldn't interpret, perhaps the Cathar equivalent of a nod. An uncomfortable silence fell between them, filled only by the sound of the storm. Juan found himself studying his companion more closely. He had seen Cathar before, of course, mostly through rifle sights or in intelligence briefings, but never this close, and never in a non-combat situation. Queen Velina was smaller than the warriors, her exoskeleton more delicately patterned with swirls of deep purple against the standard blue-gray. The 6 eyes that humans found so disconcerting were actually quite expressive, changing slightly in luminosity and size as her attention shifted. Why attack New Providence? Juan asked suddenly. We're not a military target, just farmers and scientists, trying to build something new. Velina's eyes dimmed slightly. Sadness? Regret? It was impossible to tell. Need new home, she said finally. The translator struggled with her dialect, but the meaning was clear enough. There are dozens of uninhabited planets in this sector alone, Juan countered. Why take one that's already settled? Not suitable. Need specific atmosphere, biology. She made a complex gesture that the translator couldn't parse. Your planet. Perfect. So you decided to just take it? Kill everyone who was already here? War efficient. Her eyes met his directly. Your species. Did same. Many times. Juan couldn't argue with that. Humanity's expansion into the stars hadn't always been peaceful. There were more than a few species who viewed humans with the same fear and hatred that humans directed toward the Kethar. That doesn't make it right, he said finally. Right. Wrong. The translator crackled with what might have been a laugh. Survival, only law that matters. Before Juan could respond, a new sound cut through the howl of the storm, a high-pitched whine that he recognized immediately. Kethar search drones. They're looking for you, he whispered, instinctively pressing back against the rock wall, though he knew the drone's sensors could detect life signs through solid stone. Yes, Vaylina confirmed. Imperial Guard. Never stop searching. The whine grew louder, then began to fade as the drone passed overhead, continuing its search pattern beyond their hiding place. Why not signal them? Juan asked. You could be rescued, treated by your own doctors instead of relying on my field medicine. Vaylina was silent for a long moment. Not rescue, she said finally. Replacement. What? I failed. Attack failed. Protocol clear. Failed Queen. Replaced. One stared at her in shock. They would kill you? Their own queen. Efficiency, she replied. As if that explained everything. And perhaps, in the brutal meritocracy of Kethar society, it did. The implications spun through Juan's mind. If Vaylina's own people would execute her for failure, then his decision to save her had just become even more complicated. He wasn't just helping an enemy combatant. He was interfering in the internal politics of a hostile alien species. So what happens now? He asked. I can't take you back to the human settlement. You can't go back to your people. We're stuck in the middle of nowhere with a dust storm raging outside. Now, Vaylina said, her translator rendering the word with unexpected clarity. We survive, together. The storm raged on outside their shelter, a fitting backdrop to the turmoil in Juan's mind. He had set out to save a life, following the most basic instinct of his medical training. Now he found himself entangled in something far more complex, a potential turning point in the relationship between two species that had known only war. He leaned back against the rock wall and closed his eyes, listening to the howl of the alien wind. 40 miles still lay ahead of them, 40 miles that seemed to stretch into infinity. The storm passed in the early hours of the morning, leaving behind an eerie silence. Juan awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. His hand reached instinctively for his rifle before he remembered where he was and who he was with. Queen Vaylina was awake, her 6 eyes glowing faintly in the pre-dawn darkness. She had shifted position slightly during the night, propping herself up against the rock wall to better see the entrance to their shelter. Storm passed, she observed as Juan stirred. He nodded, wincing at the stiffness in his neck and shoulders. Sleeping on bare rock hadn't done his already taxed muscles any favors. We should move, he said, packing away the shelter sheet. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and it's better to travel during the cooler part of the day. Vaylina made no objection as he prepared the stretcher. Her wounds had stabilized overnight, but she was still in no condition to walk, especially given the rough terrain ahead. As Juan hoisted the stretcher once more, a new concern struck him. I don't suppose you know if there are any more Kethar search parties between here and Kinswell Ridge. Imperial Guard. Standard pattern. 3 waves. First passed. Second. She made a gesture toward the horizon. Coming soon. Not exactly reassuring news. Juan adjusted his grip on the stretcher and set off, establishing a steady pace that he hoped he could maintain for the long journey ahead. The landscape changed as they moved further from the settlement. The rust-colored plains gave way to more varied terrain, deep ravines cut by ancient rivers, strange rock formations sculpted by eons of wind, and occasional patches of native vegetation. The alien plants were mostly low, twisted things in shades of burgundy and amber, adapted to the harsh conditions of New Providence. As the sun climbed higher, Juan maintained a vigilant watch for Kethar patrols. Several times they were forced to detour into ravines or behind rock formations to avoid being spotted by distant hover units. "Your people are thorough," he commented during one such detour, setting the stretcher down to rest his arms while they waited for a patrol to pass. "Efficiency," Velina replied, using what seemed to be a favorite word. "Kethar military. Most efficient in galaxy." "Efficient at killing, you mean?" "At survival," she corrected. "Galaxy. Hostile place. Species that cannot defend. Disappear." Juan couldn't argue with the basic truth of her statement, though he disagreed with the conclusion the Kethar had drawn from it. There's a difference between defense and conquest. "Is there?" Her eyes fixed on him with unnerving intensity. "Your species expanded across stars, took resources, established colonies. How different?" It was an uncomfortable question, one that many humans had wrestled with during their expansion into space. The official policy was to settle only uninhabited worlds. But the definition of uninhabited was conveniently flexible when valuable resources were at stake. "We try to do better," Juan said finally. "Not always successfully, but we try. There's a difference between failing to live up to your ideals and not having any ideals at all." Velina made a sound that the translator didn't catch, possibly a scoff or laugh. "Ideals. Luxury of the secure. My people. Not secure for generations." Before Juan could respond, a distant rumble interrupted their conversation. He looked up at the sky, expecting another dust storm, but the sound wasn't coming from the atmosphere. It was coming from the ground. "Earthquake?" he wondered aloud. Velina's eyes widened slightly. "Alarm," he guessed. "Not earthquake. Acid rain, dissolving limestone caves, underground collapse." As if to confirm her words, a section of ground about 50 yards ahead suddenly sank inward, creating a bowl-shaped depression. The rumbling intensified. "We need to move!" Juan grabbed the stretcher, ignoring the protest from his muscles. "Which direction?" Velina pointed with one of her undamaged limbs. "Higher ground. Solid rock." Juan set off at a run toward a ridge of exposed bedrock, the stretcher bouncing uncomfortably in his grip. Behind them, the depression widened, earth and rock disappearing into some unseen cavern below. They reached the bedrock, just as a new wave of collapses began. Juan set the stretcher down and watched in horrified fascination as the ground they had just crossed disintegrated, revealing a vast network of caves beneath. "That was close," he breathed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "How did you know?" "Kethar. Studied New Providence geology. Extensive cave systems. One reason planet valuable." Juan raised an eyebrow. "You came here for our caves?" "Partially. Kethar prefer underground dwelling, natural fortification." The revelation added a new dimension to the conflict. It wasn't just the surface of New Providence the Kethar wanted. It was what lay beneath, a ready-made home that suited their evolutionary preferences. As the collapse subsided, Juan assessed their new situation. The cave-in had opened a chasm between them and their planned route, forcing a detour that would add miles to their journey. "We'll have to go around," he said, studying the horizon. "Adds at least a day to our trip." "Or," Velina gestured toward the exposed cave system. "Through." Juan followed her gaze. The collapse had revealed not just a pit but a network of tunnels leading away from it. If they could safely descend, they might be able to pass beneath the chasm and emerge on the other side. "Is that safe? You just said the acid rain is dissolving the limestone." "Upper levels only, deeper caves, stable. Kethar surveys confirm." Juan weighed their options. The surface route would add significant time to their journey, increasing the risk of detection by both Kethar and human patrols. The cave system was an unknown danger, but potentially a faster path to safety. "You're sure about this?" he asked, still hesitant. "Not sure." Valina's eyes dimmed slightly. "But logical risk." Logical risk. Another very Cathar concept. Juan had seen enough of their military tactics to know that they calculated acceptable casualties with cold precision, weighing losses against strategic gains in a way that humans found chilling. But in this case, she might be right. The surface was becoming increasingly dangerous as the fighting spread across New Providence. The caves offered concealment, if not safety. "All right," he decided. "We go underground, but at the first sign of instability, we find another way." Finding a safe path down was the first challenge. Many of the exposed tunnel entrances were either too steep or too unstable to attempt, especially with Juan carrying the stretcher. Eventually, they located a section where the collapse had created a sort of natural ramp into one of the larger tunnels. Juan fashioned a crude torch from materials in his pack, a strip of emergency blanket wrapped around a piece of debris, soaked in antiseptic fluid that would burn slowly. It wasn't ideal, but it would provide enough light to navigate. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, lifting the stretcher once more and beginning the careful descent into the darkness. The tunnel air was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the arid heat above. Juan's torch cast dancing shadows on walls that glistened with moisture. Strange formations hung from the ceiling, stalactites in hues of amber and teal that suggested mineral compositions unknown on Earth. "Beautiful," Juan commented, despite himself. "Yes," Valina agreed. "Reminds of home caves, before plague." Juan nearly stumbled. "Plague? What plague?" Valina was silent for a moment, as if regretting her words. Finally, she answered. "Reason we seek new home. Biological agent. Destroying Cathar homeworld. Soil. Water. Contaminated. Cannot grow food. Cannot live." The revelation hit Juan like a physical blow. The Cathar weren't just expanding their empire. They were refugees, fleeing a dying world. "Why didn't your people just ask for help?" he demanded. "Humanity has experience with terraforming, with biological remediation. We could have asked humans for help?" The translator rendered her tone as incredulous. "After 5 wars? After human forces used biological weapons against Cathar colonies in Draconis sector?" Juan fell silent. She had a point. The history between their species was written in blood and mutual atrocity. Trust was in short supply on both sides. They continued deeper into the cave system, the tunnel gradually widening into a vast chamber. Juan's torch illuminated only a small portion of it, but he could sense the immensity of the space around them, a cathedral carved by water and time. Strange formations dotted the chamber floor, not natural stalagmites, but something regular and geometric. As they drew closer, Juan realized with a start that they were ruins, the remnants of structures built by intelligent hands. "What is this place?" he whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "Ancient civilization," Valina replied, her tone suggesting this was common knowledge. "Extinct 10,000 years before humans or Cathar reached stars." Juan set the stretcher down gently, allowing them both to rest while he examined the ruins more closely. The structures were built from the native stone, their surfaces etched with symbols unlike any human or Cathar writing he had seen. Did they die out naturally or? Unknown. No evidence of violence. No evidence of plague. Simply gone. Valina's eyes tracked across the ruined structures. Perhaps warning for us. The implication hung in the air between them, a sobering reminder of the fragility of civilization, regardless of its technological advancement. This nameless species had built cities underground, perhaps thinking themselves secure from whatever dangers lurked on the surface. Yet, they had vanished all the same. "We should keep moving," Juan said finally, reluctant to disturb the sepulchral quiet of the chamber, but aware of the time slipping away. "Can you tell which tunnel might lead us toward Kinswell Ridge?" Velina studied the various openings that led from the chamber, then pointed to one on the far side. "That direction." "Correct." Juan hoisted the stretcher again, his muscles protesting the continued strain. They left the ancient ruins behind, proceeding deeper into the cave system. The tunnel Velina had indicated sloped gradually upward, which Juan took as a good sign. Eventually, they would need to return to the surface, preferably on the far side of the chasm that had blocked their original route. As they ascended, the air grew noticeably warmer and drier. Juan's torch began to sputter as the antiseptic fuel ran low. "We're going to lose light soon," he warned. "I hope we're close to an exit." "Listen," Velina said suddenly. Juan paused, straining his ears. At first, he heard nothing but the soft drip of water somewhere in the darkness. Then, a faint whistle of wind. Air current, he realized. There must be an opening ahead. They quickened their pace as much as the narrow tunnel and Juan's burden would allow. The torch gave one final flare and went out, plunging them into darkness. "Keep going," Velina urged. "Air current stronger. Exit close." Juan felt his way forward cautiously, one hand on the tunnel wall for guidance. The sound of wind grew louder, and a faint lightening of the darkness ahead confirmed they were approaching an exit. Finally, they emerged from the tunnel into the harsh sunlight of late afternoon. Juan set the stretcher down and took a moment to get his bearings. They had indeed bypassed the chasm, emerging on a plateau that overlooked a vast valley. In the distance, perhaps 20 miles away, he could just make out the gleaming structures of Kinswell Ridge, their destination. "We made it through," he said with relief, "and we're more than halfway there." Velina made a gesture that might have been agreement. "Efficient route," she commented, and Juan thought he detected a note of satisfaction in her translator's rendering. They rested in the shade of a rock outcropping, Juan sharing his limited water rations with the Kether Queen. He knew little about her species' hydration needs, but figured the universal principle of water is good probably applied. As they prepared to set off again, a distant whine caught Juan's attention, the now familiar sound of Kether hover units. He tensed, scanning the horizon. "Imperial Guard," Velina confirmed. "Second wave search pattern." 3 hover units crested a distant ridge, moving in a coordinated search pattern toward their position. There was nowhere to hide on the exposed plateau. They would be spotted within minutes. "Can you communicate with them?" Juan asked urgently. "Tell them to back off?" Velina's eyes dimmed slightly. Communications device, damaged in attack, and even if functional, would not help. "Why not? You're their queen." "Was queen," she corrected. "Now, failure. Protocol clear." Juan remembered their earlier conversation, the Kether policy of replacing failed leaders. If these search units found them, they wouldn't be coming to rescue Velina. They would be coming to execute her, and probably Juan as well, for good measure. "Then we need to move. Now," he decided, grabbing the stretcher. "There's a ravine about a quarter-mile ahead. If we can reach it before they spot us, we might be able to lose them in the rough terrain." He set off at the fastest pace he dared, the stretcher bouncing uncomfortably in his grip. Velina made no complaint about the rough handling, her eyes fixed on the approaching hover units. They were halfway to the ravine when one of the units changed course, heading directly toward them. They had been spotted. "Run," Velina urged. "Leave me. Save yourself." "Not happening," Juan grunted, increasing his pace despite the burning in his muscles. "We make it together or not at all." The hover unit closed rapidly, the whine of its engines growing to a deafening pitch. Juan could see the silhouettes of Kether warriors now, their weapons raised. They reached the edge of the ravine just as the unit passed overhead. Juan dove for cover beneath an overhanging ledge, pulling the stretcher in beside him. Energy bolts sizzled against the rock face where they had been moments before. The hover unit circled back for another pass. Juan knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. Kethar sensors would quickly pinpoint their location. Options? He asked Velina desperately. Her eyes scanned the ravine below them. Descent. Possible. Dense vegetation at bottom. Might hide thermal signatures. It was a slim chance, but better than none. Juan peered over the edge of the ravine. It was steep, but navigable. A series of natural ledges that could serve as a makeshift path down. Hold on, he told Velina, securing her more firmly to the stretcher. This is going to be rough. He began the descent, half climbing, half sliding down the ravine wall. Above them, the hover unit made another pass, energy bolts impacting the rocks around them and sending showers of debris cascading down. Juan's foot slipped on loose stone, nearly sending them both tumbling to the bottom. He caught himself against the ravine wall, scraping his hands raw in the process. Almost there, he gasped, more to himself than to Velina. They reached the bottom of the ravine, just as two more hover units joined the first. The combined searchlights swept the area, illuminating the dense vegetation that covered the ravine floor. Strange, fern-like plants in shades of deep burgundy that grew twice as tall as a human. In here, Juan whispered, pushing through the thick vegetation. The plants released a pungent odor as they were disturbed. Not unpleasant, but strong enough to make his eyes water. They burrowed deeper into the vegetation until they were completely hidden from above. Juan set the stretcher down carefully and collapsed beside it, his muscles trembling with exhaustion. The hover units continued to circle overhead, their searchlights cutting through the gathering dusk. But the dense vegetation seemed to be working as Velina had suggested, either masking their thermal signatures or confusing the sensors with the plant's own heat. As darkness fell, the search intensified. More hover units joined the hunt, their combined engines creating a constant drone that made conversation impossible. Juan and Velina lay in tense silence, watching the searchlights pass overhead again and again. Hours passed. Juan's exhaustion warred with his anxiety, neither allowing him to rest. Beside him, Velina remained alert, her eyes tracking each passing hover unit with calculated precision. Finally, well after midnight, the search pattern changed. The hover units began to move away, expanding their search area to adjacent sectors. They're giving up, Juan whispered, hardly daring to hope. Not giving up, Velina replied. Changing strategy. We'll establish perimeter. Wait for us to emerge. So we're trapped. Temporarily, she agreed. But Imperial Guard cannot maintain full perimeter. Too few units. Too much territory. So we wait for a gap, then make a run for it? Yes, logical strategy. Juan settled back against the damp earth, allowing himself to relax slightly for the first time in hours. You know, for a queen, you think a lot like a soldier. All Kethar, trained as warriors from hatching. Queen receives additional training, tactics, strategy, governance. That's no way to raise children, Juan said without thinking. Velina's eyes focused on him with new intensity. Children? Interesting concept. Kethar have offspring, not children. What's the difference? Children. Protected. Nurtured. Kethar offspring. Tested. Strengthened through challenge. Weak do not survive. The casual brutality of it shocked Juan, though he shouldn't have been surprised. Everything he knew about Kethar society emphasized efficiency and strength above all else. That's horrible, he said bluntly. Is it? Your species. Different approach. Result: billions of humans requiring resources. Many weak, unable to contribute. Inefficient. There's more to life than efficiency, Juan argued. Compassion, art, love. The things that make life worth living. Worth living, Velina repeated, as if considering the phrase for the first time. Kethar live, to ensure species survives. Individual life, secondary. And yet here you are, fighting to survive despite your failure. Juan pointed out. Seems like your individual life matters to you after all. Velina fell silent, her eyes dimming slightly in what Juan had come to recognize as the Kethar equivalent of deep thought. Finally, she spoke. Perhaps individual matters more than training suggests. Perhaps why I ordered attack pause. What? Juan sat up straighter. You stopped the attack on New Providence? Ordered pause to assess alternative strategies, possibilities for coexistence. Her eyes met his directly. Order given. Moments before building collapsed, the revelation stunned Juan. All this time, he had assumed Velina was the architect of the attack, the butcher responsible for the destruction of his new home. But if she was telling the truth, she had actually tried to stop it. Why? He asked. Why consider coexistence after all this time? Plague. Spreading faster than predicted. Cannot afford. More war. Need solution. Need help. And you thought humans might help you? After everything that's happened between our species? Hoped. Might be possibility. Small chance. Better than no chance. Juan leaned back, processing this new information. If Velina had indeed ordered a pause in the attack, it changed everything about their current situation. She wasn't just an enemy combatant he had saved on a humanitarian impulse. She was potentially the key to peace between their species. When we reach Kinswell Ridge, he said slowly, would you be willing to meet with human authorities to discuss this possibility of coexistence? Yes, she replied without hesitation. Purpose of journey. More important than survival now. A newfound determination energized Juan, despite his exhaustion. They were no longer just two individuals trying to survive. They were the potential beginning of a new chapter in human-Kethar relations. Then we should rest while we can, he decided. Tomorrow, we find a gap in their perimeter and make a run for Kinswell Ridge. As he settled back to try to sleep, Juan found himself studying Velina with new eyes. Not as an alien queen or an enemy combatant, but as a potential ally, perhaps even a friend. It was a strange thought, but no stranger than anything else that had happened since he found her beneath the rubble of Main Street. 20 miles still lay between them and Kinswell Ridge. 20 miles that could change the course of two species forever. Dawn brought a light drizzle, unusual for New Providence's typically arid climate. Juan awoke to the sensation of droplets pattering through the canopy of vegetation onto his face. He sat up quickly, suddenly alert. Acid rain, he realized with alarm. We need to move. Velina was already awake, her eyes fixed on the small holes appearing in the large, fern-like leaves above them as the acidic droplets ate through the plant matter. Shelter required, she agreed. Acid concentration increasing. Juan packed up their meager supplies and secured Velina to the stretcher once more. The rain was still light, but already he could feel a slight burning sensation where droplets touched his exposed skin. Where are the Kethar patrols? He asked, peering cautiously through the vegetation. Velina's eyes scanned the ravine rim above them. 2 units, visible, others likely beyond visual range. Can we make it up the other side of the ravine without being spotted? Possible. Rain. Interferes with sensors. Acid content. Especially disruptive. A small advantage, but Juan would take it. He hoisted the stretcher and began making his way through the dense vegetation toward the opposite wall of the ravine. The plants seemed to be suffering from the acid rain, their once rigid stems wilting as the caustic liquid ate into them. The far wall of the ravine was steeper than the side they had descended, with fewer natural ledges to assist their climb. Juan studied it with growing concern. I don't think I can carry you up that, he admitted. Not while maintaining a grip on the rock face. Velina assessed the situation with calculating eyes. Alternative. Follow ravine. May lead to less steep exit. It was their best option. Juan adjusted his grip on the stretcher and began moving downstream, keeping close to the ravine wall for what little protection it offered from the increasing rain. The acid was becoming more concentrated. He could see it etching patterns in the rock face beside them. His breather mask protected his lungs, but his exposed hands were developing an angry red rash where the droplets landed. They had traveled perhaps half a mile when the ravine widened abruptly, opening into a broader valley. The rain was coming down harder now, forcing Juan to move at a hunched run, trying to keep Velina's stretcher as covered as possible with his own body. Through the curtain of rain, he spotted a dark opening in the valley wall, another cave entrance. Without hesitation, he made for it, gasping with relief as they passed out of the corrosive downpour into the relative safety of the cave. Juan set the stretcher down carefully and took stock of their situation. His hands and forearms were covered in chemical burns from the acid rain, painful but not debilitating. Velina had fared better, her exoskeleton providing natural protection, though some of the more delicate sensory appendages around her eye cluster showed signs of damage. "That was close," he muttered, applying a neutralizing gel from his medkit to the worst of his burns. "How long do these acid storms usually last?" "Variable," Velina replied. "Sometimes hours, sometimes days." "Days?" Juan stared at her in dismay. "We can't afford to be stuck here for days. We need to reach Kinswell Ridge before your people realize where we're headed." "Agreement," Velina said. "But acid rain, severe biological hazard, exposure for more than 30 minutes, potentially fatal for both species." Juan moved deeper into the cave, hoping to find another exit or at least a passage that might lead them closer to their destination. The tunnel extended about 100 yards before ending in a solid rock face. "Dead end," he reported, returning to where Velina lay. "Looks like we're waiting out the storm after all." He settled beside the stretcher, using the enforced rest to check Velina's wounds more thoroughly. The hasty field medicine he had performed was holding, but infection was beginning to set in around the edges of the amputated limbs. "I need to clean these again," he told her, unpacking his medical supplies. "It's going to hurt." "Pain, irrelevant," Velina responded. "Survival, priority." Despite her stoic words, Juan saw her eyes dim noticeably when he began debriding the infected tissue. He worked as quickly and gently as possible, applying antibiotic gel and fresh bandages. "There," he said when he had finished. "That should hold for now, but you'll need proper medical attention soon." "Human medicine compatible with Kether biology?" "Not entirely," Juan admitted. "I'm using universal antibiotics and pain management, but they're not as effective for your species as they would be for humans. The research station at Kinswell Ridge has xenobiologists who should be able to provide better care." They lapsed into silence, listening to the hiss of acid rain against the rocks outside. After a while, Juan found himself studying Velina again, curiosity overcoming his ingrained wariness. "Can I ask you something?" he ventured. Velina's eyes focused on him. "Ask, why did you become queen? In a society that values strength and efficiency above all else, that executes leaders who fail, why take that risk?" She was silent for so long that Juan thought she might not answer. Finally, she spoke. "Not choice. Genetic selection, born with queen markers, trained from hatching for role." "You didn't have any say in the matter?" "Kethar do not choose roles. Biology determines function, efficiency." "That sounds like a convenient excuse for those at the top of your hierarchy," Juan observed. "A way to justify their power." Velina made a sound that the translator didn't catch, possibly a laugh or scoff. "Power, burden. Queen serves species, not other way around." "Is that why you ordered the attack pause? Because you felt it served your species better than continued conflict?" "Yes, and curiosity." "Curiosity about what?" "Humans," she replied simply. "Reports indicated unusual behaviors, inefficient actions, individuals risking lives for others, maintaining relationships with no survival benefit. You mean like friendship, love, compassion? Yes, concepts. Difficult to understand, but intriguing. One considered this. And now, after what's happened between us, do you understand those concepts any better? Velina's eyes dimmed in thought. Perhaps, beginning to understand. You saved enemy, carried burden 40 miles. No logical benefit, yet, here we are. Not everything worthwhile is logical, Juan said with a small smile. Sometimes the most important things in life are the ones that don't make rational sense. Interesting perspective, Velina acknowledged. Different from Kethar teaching, but perhaps valuable. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden change in the sound from outside. The hiss of rain had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Storm passed? Juan moved cautiously to the cave entrance. The acid rain had indeed stopped, but the valley outside was transformed. The once vibrant burgundy vegetation was withered and blackened. The exposed rock surfaces etched with intricate patterns, where the acid had eaten away softer minerals. More concerning were the hover units visible on the ridgeline above, at least 6 of them, forming a perimeter around the valley. They know we're here, Juan said grimly, retreating back into the cave. They're just waiting for us to make a move. Imperial Guard. Thorough, Velina agreed. Standard containment protocol. So what's our play? We can't stay here indefinitely, and we can't fight our way through that many units. Velina's eyes fixed on him with new intensity. Communication device. In hover units. If captured. Could contact Kinswell Ridge. Request neutral transport. Great plan, except for the getting captured part, Juan said dryly. They'll kill us both before we get anywhere near those units. Not if. Surrender to humans instead. Juan stared at her. What? Human patrol. Approaching from east. Detected before rain began. If intercepted by humans first, might negotiate. There's a human patrol nearby? Why didn't you tell me? Not relevant, until now. Strategy adapts to changing conditions. Juan wasn't sure whether to be impressed by her tactical thinking or annoyed at being kept in the dark. Do you know exactly where this human patrol is? Observed pattern. Suggests arrival in valley within 2 hours. Standard sweep. Searching for Kethar stragglers. 2 hours. It wasn't much time, but it might be their best chance. If they could reach the human patrol before the Kethar forces intercepted them, they might have a shot at getting to Kinswell Ridge. All right, Juan decided. We make a run for it. Try to intercept the human patrol before your people spot us. It's risky, but it's our best option. Agreement, Velina said. Logical strategy, given limited alternatives. Juan gathered their supplies and secured Velina to the stretcher once more. His muscles protested as he lifted the burden, but determination gave him strength. They were too close to their goal to give up now. They emerged from the cave into the acid-ravaged valley. The air still carried a caustic tang that burned Juan's lungs despite his breather mask. But the worst of the storm had passed. He set off at a brisk pace, keeping to what cover remained among the withered vegetation. The hover units remained on the ridgeline, apparently content to maintain their perimeter rather than actively searching the valley floor. Perhaps they were waiting for reinforcements, or maybe they believed their quarry was still hiding in the dense vegetation of the ravine. One used this small advantage, moving as quickly as he dared toward the eastern end of the valley, where Velina had indicated the human patrol would appear. Every few minutes, he paused to check the ridgeline, tracking the positions of the hover units. They had covered perhaps half the distance when one of the units changed position, descending slightly from the ridge. Juan froze, seeking cover behind a rock formation. They've spotted us, he whispered, watching the unit change course to intercept their position. Not yet, Velina countered. Standard patrol adjustment. maintaining perimeter integrity. She was right. The hover unit completed its maneuver and resumed its position on the modified perimeter, showing no indication that it had detected their presence. One released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You know their patterns well." "Was Queen," she reminded him. "Designed patterns." They continued their cautious progress across the valley floor. The terrain became more challenging as they neared the eastern end, a series of shallow ridges and depressions that offered good cover, but slowed their advance. Juan's chronometer showed they had been moving for nearly 90 minutes when Velina suddenly tensed on the stretcher. "Human patrol," she whispered. "Coming over ridge, half-mile east." Juan couldn't see or hear anything yet, but he trusted Velina's superior senses. "Will the Kether units spot them?" "Already have 2 units, moving to intercept." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. If the Kethar forces engaged the human patrol, their own chance of reaching safety would vanish in the crossfire. "We need to warn the patrol," Juan decided. "Let them know they're heading into an ambush." "How? No communication device." Juan thought quickly. "Fire. If we start a signal fire, the patrol will see it and approach with caution." He set the stretcher down and quickly gathered what flammable material he could find. Mostly, the desiccated remains of the acid-ravaged vegetation. Using the igniter from his emergency kit, he set the pile ablaze, producing a column of dark smoke that rose into the clear post-storm sky. "Will Kether units not also see?" Velina questioned. "Definitely," Juan acknowledged. "But they already know we're in the valley. This just changes the game, forces everyone to converge on our position." "High-risk strategy. Sometimes you have to roll the dice," Juan replied, hoisting the stretcher once more. "Let's move closer to the eastern ridge. Try to intercept the human patrol before the Kethar units reach them." They set off at the fastest pace Juan could manage, the smoke signal rising behind them. Already he could hear the whine of hover units changing course, converging on the fire's location. As they approached the eastern ridge, Juan finally caught sight of the human patrol, a tactical squad in combat armor, moving cautiously down the slope toward the valley floor. They had clearly spotted the smoke signal and were approaching with weapons ready. "Hayes!" Juan called out as soon as they were in range. "Sergeant Juan Hayes, Medical Corps, New Providence Settlement." The patrol halted, weapons trained on his position. "Identify yourself," came the response. "Authorization code." Sierra Tango 479er, Juan shouted back, reciting his military ID. "I'm a non-combatant with a high-value asset. Request immediate escort to Kinswell Ridge." The patrol leader signaled his squad to advance, still maintaining a defensive formation. As they drew closer, their weapons shifted from Juan to the stretcher and its alien occupant. "What the hell is this, Hayes?" the leader demanded, the nameplate on his armor identifying him as Sergeant Torres. "You're harboring a Kethar?" "Not just any Kethar," Juan replied, setting the stretcher down carefully. "This is Queen Velina. She ordered a halt to the attack on New Providence before she was injured. She wants to negotiate." Torres' expression hardened behind his visor. "Negotiate? After what they did to the settlement? You should have put a bullet in her head, not played nursemaid." "She's our best chance for peace," Juan insisted. "She has information about why the Kethar attacked, why they need our planet. There's a plague destroying their homeworld. They're desperate, not just aggressive." "A likely story," Torres scoffed. "They've been trying to wipe us out for decades. This is just their latest excuse." Before Juan could respond, the distinctive whine of hover units filled the air. 3 Kethar craft crested the ridge behind them, weapon systems activating with an ominous hum. "Ambush!" Torres shouted, signaling his squad to take defensive positions. "Hayes, get down!" Instead, Juan placed himself between the human patrol and the approaching hover units, arms raised in a universal gesture of non-aggression. "Don't shoot," he called out to both sides. "We have your queen. She's alive and under our protection. The hover units slowed their approach, but maintained defensive posture. From the lead unit, a voice boomed through an external speaker, the translator rendering it in stilted English. Surrender failed, Queen. Will be replaced according to protocol. She hasn't failed, Juan shouted back. She ordered a halt to the attack. She's trying to find a peaceful solution to save both our species. Behind him, Torres growled. What the hell are you doing, Hayes? Get out of the line of fire. Trust me, Juan replied without turning. If either side starts shooting, we all lose. To the Kether units, he called. Take us to Kinswell Ridge, neutral territory. Let Queen Velina speak to both human and Kether authorities. There was a pause as the Kether commanders conferred. Finally, the translated response came. Queen speaks, confirms intent. Juan turned to Velina. Tell them what you told me, about the plague, about needing help, about finding a way for both our species to survive. Velina raised herself on the stretcher as much as her injuries allowed. In a clear voice that carried across the tense standoff, she spoke in the clicking Kethar language. The translator caught fragments. Plague accelerating. Cooperation essential. Shared knowledge. Survival of both species. The hover units remained motionless. Weapons still trained on the human patrol. Torres and his squad maintained their defensive posture, fingers on triggers. What's she saying? Torres demanded. She's telling them that cooperation is our only chance. Juan explained. That both species face extinction if we can't work together. The Kethar homeworld is dying from a biological plague that's contaminated their entire ecosystem. They need New Providence not just as living space, but as a base to develop a cure. And we're supposed to just hand over our colony after they attacked us? Not hand it over, share it, Juan corrected. There's room enough on this planet for both species if we work together. Torres looked skeptical. But before he could object further, the Kethar units powered down their weapon systems. The lead unit descended to ground level, a hatch opening in its side. A Kethar figure emerged, larger than Velina, with the distinctive armor of an Imperial Guard commander. It approached cautiously, 6 eyes fixed on the wounded queen. Admiral Corvex, Velina identified, her translator rendering the name in harsh syllables. The admiral stopped several paces away, studying Velina with unreadable alien eyes. Then, to Juan's surprise, it inclined its upper body in what appeared to be a gesture of deference. Queen lives, it stated, the translator struggling with its dialect. Protocol. Suspended pending. Evaluation of new strategy. Velina made a gesture with one of her undamaged limbs. Escort to Kinswell Ridge. Arrange. Neutral meeting. Human and Kethar authorities. Admiral Corvex hesitated, then turned to Torres. Human commander. Agrees to terms. Torres looked from the Kethar admiral to Juan, clearly torn between military protocol and the unprecedented diplomatic opportunity before him. I don't have the authority to negotiate, he said finally. But I can escort you to Kinswell Ridge and contact Colonel Reeves. He's the ranking officer in this sector. Acceptable, Corvex agreed. We'll accompany, with honor guard only. Main forces. Remain at distance. The tension in the air eased slightly as both sides recognized the fragile truce forming between them. Juan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They had made it. Against all odds, they had found a way to bring the two sides together. Torres approached the stretcher, examining Velina with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. You really carried her all this way? About 35 miles so far, Juan confirmed. We took some detours. Torres shook his head in disbelief. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest. He glanced at the Kethar hover units. Maybe both. Just doing my job, Juan replied. Preserving life when I can, regardless of who it belongs to. Torres signaled his squad to form up around the stretcher. "We'll take it from here. You look dead on your feet, Hayes." "I'm seeing this through," Juan insisted, taking his position at the head of the stretcher once more. "All the way to Kinswell Ridge." As the unusual procession set off, human soldiers and Cathar guards escorting a wounded alien queen and her human savior, Juan caught Velina's eye. There was something new there, something he hadn't seen before. The translator couldn't capture it, but he understood nonetheless. Hope, for both their species. The final 5 miles to Kinswell Ridge passed intense but peaceful cooperation. The neutral research station, visible for miles with its distinctive white domes, grew larger on the horizon with each step. Kinswell Ridge had been established before the Fifth Galactic Conflict as a joint scientific venture, one of the few places where humans and non-human species could work together without political interference. Its neutrality was respected even during the darkest days of the war, making it the perfect venue for this unprecedented meeting. As they approached the main entrance, a delegation emerged to meet them. Scientists in white coats mixed with security personnel in the neutral gray uniforms of the Interstellar Research Consortium. "What's all this?" asked a tall, distinguished-looking woman at the front of the delegation. Her insignia identified her as Dr. Eleanor Chen, the station's director. Torres stepped forward. "Dr. Chen, we have a diplomatic situation. Queen Velina of the Cathar Empire wishes to meet with human authorities to discuss terms for ending the conflict." Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Queen Velina, here?" Her gaze fell on the stretcher and its alien occupant. "She requires medical attention immediately. Bring her inside." The Cathar guards tensed, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of their queen entering a facility staffed primarily by humans. "Admiral Korvex and 2 guards may accompany," Dr. Chen added, recognizing their concern. "The rest must remain outside the perimeter." After a brief consultation in their native language, Korvex agreed to the terms. The procession moved into the main dome of Kinswell Ridge, Juan still refusing to relinquish his position at the head of the stretcher. Inside, they were directed to the medical bay, a state-of-the-art facility equipped to handle a variety of species. Dr. Chen personally oversaw Velina's transfer from the crude stretcher to a proper medical bed. "You did remarkably well with field medicine," she commented to Juan after examining Velina's wounds. "Especially considering the limited knowledge we have of Cathar physiology." "Just basic trauma care," Juan replied modestly. "Stop the bleeding, prevent infection, manage pain." "Nevertheless, you saved her life." Dr. Chen turned to Admiral Korvex. "With your permission, we would like to begin more comprehensive treatment. Our xenobiology team has some experience with Cathar biology from previous research exchanges." Korvex made a gesture that might have been assent. "Proceed, but guard remains." "Of course." Dr. Chen signaled her medical team to begin preparations. "Sergeant Hayes, you should get some rest. You look exhausted." "I'm staying," Juan insisted. "I've come this far with her. I want to see this through." Dr. Chen studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. But at least let us treat those burns while you wait." While the medical team worked on Velina, a nurse attended to Juan's acid burns. The soothing gel they applied immediately relieved the stinging pain he had been ignoring for hours. Torres had left to contact Colonel Reeves, returning an hour later with news that the human commander was en route to Kinswell Ridge for the unprecedented diplomatic meeting. "He's bringing a full security detail," Torres informed Juan, "and he's not happy about any of this. He'll understand when he hears what Velina has to say." Juan replied with more confidence than he felt. The medical treatment took several hours. When it was complete, Velina looked markedly improved. Her wounds were properly dressed, the infected tissue removed and replaced with a regenerative matrix that would help her body heal. "She needs rest," Dr. Chen announced. "But she's stable now. The meeting can proceed when Colonel Reeves arrives." They moved to a conference room, one of the few spaces in the facility large enough to accommodate both human and Kethar delegations comfortably. The room had been prepared with a neutral white banner hanging from the ceiling, the universal symbol for diplomatic parley. Velina was brought in on a hover stretcher, positioned at one end of the long table. Admiral Corvex took his place standing beside her, flanked by two Imperial guards. Juan found himself in an unusual position, neither fully part of the human delegation nor aligned with the Kethar. He stood off to the side, an observer to the history he had helped create. The door opened, and Colonel Reeves entered with his security detail. He was a hard-faced man with the bearing of someone who had seen too much combat to be easily impressed. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded without preamble. "I'm told we're having peace talks with the very enemy that just decimated one of our settlements." "Colonel Reeves," Dr. Chen began, "this is—" "I know who she is," Reeves interrupted. "What I don't understand is why she's receiving medical care instead of being held as a prisoner of war." Juan stepped forward. "Sir, if I may explain." "Hayes," Reeves acknowledged with a curt nod. "Torres briefed me on your adventure. While I appreciate your medical ethics, harboring the enemy commander crosses a line." "She ordered a halt to the attack," Juan insisted, "before she was injured, and she has critical information about why the Kethar need New Providence." Reeves's expression remained skeptical, but he took his seat at the table. "Very well. Let's hear what she has to say." Dr. Chen activated a more sophisticated translator unit, one capable of handling the Royal Kethar dialect with greater accuracy than Juan's field unit. Velina began to speak, her voice weaker than before but still carrying the authority of her position. The translator rendered her words with remarkable clarity. "Colonel Reeves, I come before you not as a conqueror, but as the leader of a dying people. The Kethar homeworld is being consumed by a biological plague that has contaminated our soil, our water, and our food sources. Within one generation, it will render our planet completely uninhabitable." She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. "We have searched for a new home for decades. Most planets capable of supporting life are already occupied or unsuitable for our biology. New Providence is one of the few that meets our needs. Its cave systems, its atmospheric composition, its geological stability. So you decided to take it by force," Reeves stated flatly. "Yes," Velina acknowledged without hesitation. "It was deemed the most efficient solution by my advisors. A swift military action to secure the necessary territory, with minimal Kethar casualties." "Minimal Kethar casualties," Reeves repeated with barely contained anger. "What about human casualties? You killed hundreds of civilians in your efficient solution." "A decision I came to question," Velina replied. "Which is why I ordered the attack halted. Before I could implement alternative strategies, I was injured in the bombardment." "Convenient timing," Reeves commented skeptically. One stepped forward again. "Sir, I believe her. She could have called for rescue at any point during our journey. Instead, she chose to risk her life to reach a neutral meeting ground." Reeves turned to Admiral Corvex. "And what's your position on this change of strategy?" Corvex's translator crackled as he responded, "Queen's wisdom, not questioned. If cooperation, more efficient than conquest, will be considered." "The plague is accelerating," Velina continued. "Our scientists estimate we have less than 5 years before mass extinction begins. We need New Providence not only as living space, but as a research base to develop a cure." "And what do humans get out of this arrangement?" Reeves asked. "Besides not being exterminated?" "Kethar technology," Velina replied without hesitation. "Medical advancements, defense systems against mutual threats, knowledge accumulated over millennia of space exploration." "Knowledge you've used primarily to wage war," Reeves pointed out. "Knowledge that could be redirected toward mutual benefit," Velina countered. 12 billion Kethar await salvation. Colonel, 12 billion lives that need not be set against human lives if we find a better path. The number hung in the air. 12 billion. More than the entire human population across all settled worlds. The scale of the potential tragedy was difficult to comprehend. Dr. Chen broke the silence. If I may, Colonel, the research potential of cooperation is enormous. Kethar biochemistry might hold the key to advancements we haven't even considered. And if this plague is as adaptable as it sounds, studying it could help us prevent similar outbreaks in human populations. Reeves leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. So you're proposing a scientific alliance? Humans and Kethar working together after 5 wars and countless atrocities on both sides? I am proposing survival, Velina stated simply. For both our species. The meeting continued for hours, moving from broad principles to specific proposals. Diplomatic teams would need to be assembled, treaties drafted, boundaries established. But the foundation was laid, a tentative agreement to explore cooperation rather than continue the cycle of conflict. When the formal session ended, Reeves approached Juan privately. You took one hell of a risk, Hayes, he said, his tone somewhere between admiration and reprimand. You could have been killed a dozen times over. It seemed worth the gamble, sir, Juan replied. After everything I saw during the war, I guess I needed to believe there was a better way. Reeves nodded slowly. Well, you might just have found it. Time will tell if this alliance holds, but it's more hope than we've had in generations. As the delegations prepared to depart, human representatives to brief their government, Kethar to communicate with their fleet, Juan sought out Velina one last time. She was being prepared for transfer to a Kethar medical ship, her condition stable but still requiring specialized care. I wanted to say goodbye, Juan said, standing beside her hover stretcher, and to wish you a full recovery. Velina's eyes focused on him with that now familiar intensity. Sergeant Hayes, your actions changed the course of 2 species. A debt cannot be repaid. No debt, Juan insisted. I just did what seemed right at the time. A very human perspective, Velina observed. Perhaps more valuable than Kethar efficiency. She paused, then added, when recovery complete, would welcome human visitor to Kethar ships. To continue cultural exchange. Juan smiled. I'd like that. And maybe someday, you could visit Earth, see how we live when we're not at war. Agreement, Velina said, making a gesture that Juan had come to recognize as the Kethar equivalent of a formal bow. Until then, gratitude. As the Kethar delegation departed, Juan stood at the entrance to Kinswell Ridge, watching the hover units rise into the evening sky. The setting sun painted the horizon in shades of amber and teal, colors that reminded him of both Earth and the Kethar homeworld, now joined in an unexpected alliance. Dr. Chen joined him, following his gaze. Quite a journey you've had, Sergeant Hayes. 40 miles, Juan mused. Doesn't sound like much, but it felt like crossing a galaxy. In a way, you did, she replied. The distance between our species wasn't measured in miles, but in understanding. You bridged that gap by doing something no one on either side thought possible. I just carried a wounded soldier to safety, Juan said. Everything else kind of happened along the way. Sometimes the greatest journeys start with the simplest steps, Dr. Chen observed. What will you do now? Juan considered the question. New Providence would need to be rebuilt, not just the physical structures, but the entire concept of the colony. A shared world would require new approaches, new technologies, new ways of thinking. I think I'll stay, he decided. There's going to be a lot of work to do, bringing 2 species together who've only known each other as enemies. Maybe I can help bridge that gap. The universe could use more bridges and fewer walls, Dr. Chen agreed. I think the research consortium would welcome your expertise, both medical and diplomatic. As they spoke, a strange phenomenon appeared in the twilight sky, a shimmering arc of color that stretched across the horizon, connecting the setting sun with the rising moons of New Providence. It wasn't quite like an Earth rainbow, with its colors shifted toward the blues and teals, but the symbolism was unmistakable. A good omen, Dr. Chen commented, following Juan's gaze. Let's hope so, he replied. We're going to need all the good omens we can get. 3 months later, Juan stood in the newly constructed Interspecies Medical Research Center, watching as human and Cathar scientists worked side by side. The building had been erected at the midpoint between the rebuilt New Providence settlement and the newly established Cathar colony, symbolizing the cooperation between the two species. The transition hadn't been smooth. Centuries of hostility couldn't be erased in a few months. There had been incidents, misunderstandings, flare-ups of old hatreds, moments when the fragile peace seemed ready to shatter. But each time, cooler heads had prevailed, often with Juan acting as an informal intermediary. His role had evolved beyond his medical training. As one of the few humans who had spent extended time with a Cathar, and the only one who had carried their queen 40 miles to safety, he had become a de facto cultural attaché, helping each side understand the other's perspective. Today marked a significant milestone, the first public announcement of progress on a vaccine for the Cathar plague. Human biochemists, working with Cathar biologists, had isolated the pathogen and developed a promising treatment protocol. Juan checked his watch. The press conference would begin in 30 minutes, with Colonel Reeves and Admiral Corvex jointly presenting the findings. It was a carefully choreographed event, designed to showcase the benefits of cooperation to both populations. Nervous? Asked Dr. Chen, appearing beside him. A little, Juan admitted. There's still a lot that could go wrong. There always is, she agreed. But look how far we've come. She gestured toward a laboratory where a human scientist was deep in conversation with a Cathar researcher, both examining a holographic display of molecular structures. 3 months ago, they would have been trying to kill each other. Progress, Juan acknowledged with a smile. His communicator chimed, a priority message. He checked the display and felt a surge of anticipation. The Cathar Royal Shuttle is arriving, he told Dr. Chen. I should be there to greet them. He made his way to the landing pad, arriving just as the sleek, blue-gray vessel touched down. The hatch opened, revealing a Cathar honor guard in ceremonial armor. They formed a pathway, and through it walked Queen Velina. Her recovery had been remarkable. Though still missing the 2 limbs lost in the attack, she moved with grace and authority. New ceremonial armor gleamed against her exoskeleton, the royal insignia prominent, but now paired with a new symbol, one that incorporated elements of both Cathar and human design, representing the alliance. Queen Velina, Juan greeted her with a formal bow. Welcome to the research center. Sergeant Hayes, she replied, her translator now rendering her speech with perfect clarity. It is good to see you again. Just Juan, please, I'm not in the military anymore. Very well. 1. She made a gesture that her people recognized as respect between equals, a significant departure from Cathar tradition, where royalty acknowledged no equals. And you may call me Velina, without the title, when we speak privately. It was a remarkable concession, one that spoke volumes about how their relationship, and perhaps Cathar society itself, was evolving. How is the new colony progressing? Juan asked, as he escorted her toward the research facility. Efficiently, she replied, with what he now recognized as the Cathar equivalent of humor. Though perhaps with more consideration for individual preferences than is traditional. Your influence, I suspect. Just sharing ideas, Juan said. Cultural exchange works both ways. As they walked, Velina observed the facility with obvious interest. Your architects have incorporated Kethar design elements, she noted, gesturing toward the vaulted ceilings and hexagonal support structures. It is welcoming. That was the intention. We want both species to feel at home here. They reached the main laboratory, where the research teams were making final preparations for the press conference. Admiral Korvex was already there, engaged in what appeared to be a cordial conversation with Colonel Reeves, a sight that would have been unthinkable just months ago. Admiral, Velina acknowledged, approaching the pair. Colonel, I understand there has been significant progress. Indeed, Your Majesty, Dr. Chen confirmed, joining them. The vaccine trials have shown a 94% efficacy rate in laboratory conditions. We believe with further refinement, we can increase that to 98% or higher. Enough to save your homeworld? Juan asked. Enough to begin the healing process, Velina replied. Complete restoration will take generations, but this gives our people something they have not had in decades: hope. The press conference proceeded as planned, with representatives of both species presenting the research findings to a mixed audience of human and Kethar journalists. The technical details were impressive, but what struck Juan most was the atmosphere in the room. Cautious optimism replacing the fear and hatred that had defined interspecies relations for so long. After the formal presentations, there was a ceremonial signing of the Interspecies Research Accord, a document that formalized the scientific collaboration and established a framework for future cooperation. As the architects of the alliance, Velina and Colonel Reeves were the primary signatories, with Dr. Chen and Admiral Korvex as witnesses. When the official proceedings concluded, Velina approached Juan privately. There is something I wish to discuss, she said, guiding him to a quiet corner away from the crowds. A proposal. I'm listening, Juan replied, curious. The vaccine distribution will require coordination between our worlds. I would like you to serve as liaison, to accompany me on a diplomatic mission to the Kethar fleet, and eventually to our homeworld once it is safe to return. Juan was momentarily speechless. Me? Wouldn't someone with diplomatic training be better suited? Perhaps, Velina acknowledged. But no one else has your unique perspective, or the trust of both species. You are the bridge, Juan Hayes, the one who carried an enemy queen to safety and changed the course of history. The offer was unexpected, but intriguing. Juan had never considered himself a diplomat. But then again, he had never considered himself a hero either. Life had a way of pushing him into roles he hadn't anticipated. When would we leave? He asked. Within the month, if you accept. There would be preparation required, of course. Briefings on Kethar culture, protocol, biology. I've had some first-hand experience with the latter, Juan noted with a small smile. Indeed. Your field medicine saved my life. Perhaps now you can help save my species. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on Juan. 3 months ago, he had been a simple colonist trying to build a new life. Now he was being offered a chance to help shape the future of two civilizations. I'll do it, he decided, on one condition. Velina's eyes focused on him with familiar intensity. Name it. When we've distributed the vaccine and your homeworld begins to recover, you visit Earth, see where we came from, understand who we are beyond the battlefield. A fair exchange, Velina agreed. It would be educational to see the cradle of humanity. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Reeves, who had been watching their interaction with interest. Making plans already, Hayes? He asked, his tone considerably warmer than during their first meeting at Kinswell Ridge. Queen Velina has offered me a position as liaison for the vaccine distribution program. Juan explained. I've accepted. Reeves nodded thoughtfully. Good choice, on both your parts. He extended his hand to Velina in the human gesture of agreement. After a moment's hesitation, she reached out with one of her undamaged limbs and completed the handshake. It was a small moment, unremarkable to most observers. But to Juan, it represented everything they had accomplished, and everything still possible between their species. The celebration continued into the evening, with both humans and Kethar participating in a shared meal, another first in their long history. The food had been carefully prepared to be compatible with both biologies, another small miracle of science and cooperation. As the event wound down, Juan found himself on a balcony overlooking the valley between the two settlements. In the distance, lights glowed from both the human colony and the Kethar encampment, separate but increasingly connected. "Quite a view," Dr. Chen commented, joining him. "Two worlds coming together." "With a lot of work still ahead," Juan reminded her. "Always," she agreed. "But the hardest step is the first one. You took that step when you decided to save Velina instead of finishing her." "I just followed my conscience," Juan said. "Did what seemed right at the time." That's usually how the big changes start. One person doing what seems right, even when it goes against everything they've been taught. They stood in companionable silence, watching the lights of the two communities twinkling in the gathering darkness. Above them, the strange rainbow phenomenon appeared again, a shimmering bridge of color connecting the disparate parts of the sky. "That's becoming more common," Dr. Chen observed. "The scientists think it's a reaction between our terraforming chemicals and the native atmosphere. Technically, it's a form of light pollution." "Maybe," Juan replied. "Or maybe it's just the universe's way of telling us we're on the right track." 1 month later, Juan stood on the launch pad, a small pack of personal belongings slung over his shoulder. The Kethar Royal Shuttle gleamed in the morning sun, its loading ramp extended in welcome. A small delegation had gathered to see him off: Dr. Chen, Colonel Reeves, and several colleagues from the research center. The farewell was brief, but heartfelt. "Don't forget where you come from," Reeves advised, clasping Juan's hand firmly. "But don't be afraid to embrace where you're going, either." "Sound advice, Colonel. I'll do my best." Dr. Chen hugged him warmly. "Keep detailed records," she urged. "The scientific community will be eager to learn everything you observe about Kethar society." "I'll try not to cause any interstellar incidents with my note-taking," Juan promised with a smile. As he turned toward the shuttle, a familiar figure appeared at the top of the ramp: Queen Velina, resplendent in diplomatic regalia. "Ready for our journey, Liaison Hayes?" she called down, using his new official title. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, ascending the ramp to join her. Inside, the shuttle was a marvel of Kethar engineering, sleek, efficient, and surprisingly accommodating for human physiology. A section had been specially modified with furnishings suited to human needs, including a bed adjusted for his spine and gravity preferences. "You've gone to a lot of trouble," Juan observed, examining the accommodations. "Efficiency," Velina replied, with what he now recognized as her version of humor. "Cannot have human liaison incapacitated by improper ergonomics." Of course, very inefficient. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, rapidly ascending through New Providence's atmosphere, through the viewing port. Juan watched as the planet's surface receded, the settlement, the research center, and the landscape where he had carried a wounded queen 40 miles to safety, all shrinking to insignificance against the vastness of the world. As they reached orbit, the Kethar fleet came into view, dozens of massive vessels arranged in perfect formation. At the center was the flagship, a behemoth that dwarfed everything around it. "Impressive," Juan commented. "Home, for now," Velina replied. "Until the homeworld is habitable again." Their shuttle docked with the flagship, where they were greeted by a formal reception of Kethar officials and scientists. Juan noticed the curious looks directed his way. He was likely the first human many of them had seen up close without combat involved. "I have an announcement," Velina declared to the assembled Kethar. "Liaison Hayes will be accompanying our diplomatic mission, not as a guest, but as an equal partner in our healing process. He will have full access to all non-military areas of the ship and will participate in all vaccine distribution planning sessions. There was a murmur among the Kethar. Not quite protest, but definitely surprise. One realized he was witnessing a significant departure from traditional Kethar protocol. As the formal reception concluded, Velina guided him through the massive ship toward what would be his quarters during their journey. The corridors were designed for Kethar physiology, higher ceilings, different proportions, but not uncomfortable for human navigation. "Your people seem hesitant about my presence," Juan observed. "Change comes slowly," Velina acknowledged. "For centuries, they have known humans only as enemies. Now they must see you as allies, perhaps even friends. It is a significant adjustment." "For both our species," Juan agreed. They reached his assigned quarters, spacious by human standards, with viewing ports that looked out into the star-filled void. Like the shuttle, it had been modified to accommodate human needs, with familiar furnishings alongside Kethar designs. "Rest," Velina advised. "Tomorrow we begin planning the distribution network. There is much to do if we are to save 12 billion lives." As she turned to leave, Juan called after her, "Velina, do you think this will work? This alliance between our species?" She paused, considering the question with characteristic thoroughness. "Unknown," she admitted finally. "But possibility exists. Greater possibility than before you found me beneath the rubble." "I'll take those odds," Juan said with a smile. "As will I," she replied, making the gesture of respect between equals before departing. Left alone in his quarters, Juan unpacked his few belongings, arranging them in the strange but not uncomfortable space. Among them was a small hollow projector containing images of New Providence, both before and after the attack, and during the early stages of rebuilding. He activated it, studying the images thoughtfully. So much destruction, so much loss. And yet, from that devastation had come an unexpected opportunity, a chance to break the cycle of conflict that had defined human-Kethar relations for generations. Through the viewing port, he could see New Providence now, a blue-green jewel set against the blackness of space. Somewhere on that world, humans and Kethar were learning to work together, to see beyond their differences to the possibility of a shared future. It had begun with a simple choice: to save a life rather than take it, to carry a wounded enemy to safety rather than leave her to die. 40 miles that had changed the course of two civilizations. As the flagship's engines hummed to life, preparing for the journey to the next distribution point, Juan felt a sense of purpose, unlike anything he had experienced before. The road ahead would not be easy. Centuries of hatred and fear could not be erased overnight, but it was a road worth traveling. The stars beckoned, promising new beginnings for both species. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, carrying the burden of hope, just as Juan had once carried a wounded queen, one careful step at a time.